careful as we proceed. Thank you. Good afternoon. This is a meeting of the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. This is Rich Cowart speaking. I'll perhaps have to stay off camera due to internet problems. And Melissa has agreed that she will step in if I disappear. We have 8 members present, and I'm happy to get going. We need to assign a note taker for today, and then also take a look at the minutes of the last meeting. Do we have any volunteers for someone to take minutes? Well, I'm not hearing any voices. Should I, do you think I should just assign somebody? Somebody who hasn't done it yet?
I can do it, Rich.
Yeah, Liz Miller is
All right.
volunteering, although Liz has. So if there's someone who has not yet taken the minutes for a monthly meeting, that would be preferable.
Okay, Liz, thank you very much. You win. Taking a look at the minutes of the last meeting, are there any corrections? I noticed only one small correction in the attendance list. I don't think TJ Poole.
Uh-oh.
Sounds like we might be losing Rich. So in reviewing the minutes from our October 10th meeting, Rich did clarify, offer the correction that TJ Poore is not a subcommittee member. He is actually a member of the electricity task group. So we'll make that correction. Any other modifications to the October minutes? Hearing none, we will deem those approved. And we'll proceed without Rich for the time being.
Melissa, you're back.
I'm back, you're back, we're both back. All right, I'll forge ahead and we'll work through the technical difficulties, folks. And I'll also flag, I know we're gonna have some subcommittee members joining a little bit late because we are overlapping with the Clean Heat Standard TAG meeting this morning. So we might have a few folks join at 12:30. Just taking a quick look at the agenda. As you'll see, we highlighted the meeting goals at the top of the agenda. That was a recommendation coming out of our last meeting where we really talked about how to make our meetings a little bit more effective and productive. So those 2 goals are to solicit committee input on the non-energy pathway strategies and actions that Liz from the Climate Action Office is going to present, and then also spend the bulk of our time preparing for the upcoming stakeholder input session to be held a week from today on November 7th, related to the transportation sector. And part of that will be developing the questions that we want to pose to attendees at that session. So those follow through the agenda. We have non-energy coming up next. We'll take a pause for public comment. I will review some of the public comment that has come in writing in response to the buildings and thermal session that we held 2 weeks ago, I believe. Then we'll dive into the meat of our discussion, which is around planning for the transportation stakeholder meeting, and take another pause for public comment, and then spend some time at the end wrapping up and talking about our next steps as we forge ahead towards the full council meeting on December 19th, during which our subcommittee is expected to present our recommendations to the full council. So diving in, Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about what you've come up with for non-energy recommendations.
Great, thanks. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Great. So I've been helping coordinate with our Climate Action Office updates and revisions to the non-energy sector. So I'm just going to go through the different pathways we have here for wastewater treatment facilities, waste prevention and reduction today. We're also working through updates for refrigerants emissions reductions, and I have some questions for that I'll pose to you all today. And then we're also working on semiconductor manufacturing emission reductions, and I'll have that update. That's still in progress that we're working through, and we'll have that update for another meeting. So again, for today's purposes, I'm going to be presenting what we have so far for the first two on this list, and then a question on refrigerants. So for this pathway strategy and action, I checked with Michelle Kolb. She is with DEC, and I asked, because no action was taken, I asked what their recommendation was for this pathway strategy and action, and they recommended to keep as is. They said that they just didn't have capacity at this point to make headway on it. So there's nothing really to change here. So that's why that recommendation is to keep as is. Any questions on that one? For
I
this,
guess if there's no action taken and we're not changing it at all, it just leads me to question, does there need to be a tweak in terms of directing where that capacity should come from or how it should materialize within the within this so that it happens? Or
yeah, I could reach back out. They said it was due to capacity, but I could ask, yeah, what would support that to make it happen?
yeah.
Okay. Support the capacity issue.
Yeah, I think capacity is capacity is an issue that I think we're gonna keep coming up against, and it may get juggled around in terms of where in action. I mean, we can't do everything at once. I totally get that. I'm not suggesting that we're gonna go, like, at some point gonna be able to like hire enough people where we can do everything simultaneously. But I do think capacity is enough of an issue that maybe it comes up in this strategy, or maybe it comes up somewhere else where we think about like how much inaction there is due strictly just to the capacity and where we might address some of them, or maybe not. I don't know. I don't know how other people feel.
No, Sam, I mean, I think it's a really good point. I think the question of who the lead is assigned to each of these recommendations, that's sometimes not front and center. And I think that leads to some of the inaction. And then this question on capacity is critical. And I think that's where the prioritization comes in. And largely those decisions are made by the legislature. If we're not going to fund everything, what are we going to bump up on the prioritization, and what falls as a lower priority? Jared, go ahead.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I just building on what Sam said, wanted to agree and say that the last part of this action, number 4, where it requires all applicable facilities that are not implementing beneficial use to have functional flares installed by January 1st, 2030. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about with our recommendations is that this revised climate action plan is really going to take us up to the deadline for the by 2030 obligation in the Global Warming Solutions Act. And so, in the first plan, having language out to 2030, it's not as, there's more time. When we passed this plan in 2021, it was 9 years, but now many of these dates are going to be within the time frame of if we keep this language the same, which I think we likely should, that target date is going to fall within the scope of this plan, whereas it didn't necessarily in the last one. So I that's a long way of saying that I do think it's important that we identify the means, whether that's being clearer about who takes the action, or what resources are needed or exist to ensure that this happens. Because I'm just not, you know, I don't think I would be, and I imagine others wouldn't be comfortable making a recommendation about something that has to happen by 2030, which this plan is going to cover, but not have a clear path forward for it.
Thanks. Anyone else on this one? I made those notes here. This recommendation. Okay.
Thanks, Liz.
So for this next batch of added pathways, strategies, and actions, myself and Colin initially met with Josh Kelly from the solid waste program team and his colleagues to see. They didn't have anything in the initial cap, but we asked if they had any thoughts or recommendations of what could go into this update. So this work came out of that. So you'll see here that this is all going to fall under the pathway of general like waste prevention and reduction here, and some of this work is already funded. So 1A and 1B are funded, but they're going to happen but haven't happened yet. And then some of these are in progress. So you'll see 2 is being implemented, and so on. But that's where this work is coming from. Any questions on this slide? And there's going to be more, so I could also go through this and then we could maybe review it. Okay. So this strategy is around reduce wasted food. And you'll see here a lot of these are being implemented, but thought it was worth noting just because it's important to the work of waste prevention and reduction.
Should we add anything about the gleaning programs? I mean, there's a lot of pretty strong gleaning work that, well, I guess if it's already going on, what's the point of including it? Never mind.
Well, some of this is already going on though too, so I can note it and ask them.
I know that those groups are under a lot of pressure with the flooding.
Okay.
In anticipation of, but I don't know if this fits here or not, because I'm not totally clear on how things get added as pathways that are I guess it's yeah. How much leeway is there in, like, how are they selected? I guess I just don't have the context for it, but I'll catch up on that another time.
Okay. Yeah, we'll keep going through this because maybe it'll help too to see what else they added in. But any other questions on this slide? Okay. This is around the recycling programs, general and special recycling. And these are also being implemented. So this is around promotion and supporting special recycling, media, and outreach.
Any inclusion for the bottle redemption? I mean, that program's been really successful, but keeps coming up for being scraps, and I don't really get why. I think it's increased recycling of one-time use bottles and cans by like 300% or something. So I'm not sure why we wouldn't sort of cement support for that program.
Yeah, is that similar to your last comment, Sam? I mean, essentially like retain what's already happening, like don't.
Yeah, because it comes up I feel like it comes up like every year, like challenges to keeping the program. Like it's really successful. I just don't, I mean, I obviously don't understand the politics to it.
I was gonna say, how much time do you have on the history of that one? Yeah, we can.
I'm being a little like, I'm playing a little ignorant. I know, I'm just trying not to touch it, that part of it, but yeah. Yeah.
Well, I add those questions in. I could definitely, when I do my follow-up, I'll reach out to Josh's team and ask about that as well. But again, if there's like language that you all would like me to propose, I could do that too. Right in here. But that's so before So, wait, okay, so that's anything else on waste prevention and reduction now that you've seen kind of the totality of it? Rich? Stand up.
Can I be heard? I'm speaking on the phone.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm curious about on the waste reduction strategies. Are there estimates on the amount of emissions that could be expected from these measures?
I didn't get, I'll ask that because I don't have amounts from them, but they might very well have.
Okay,
Wouldn't that
well,
have
it's
been,
just some,
yeah, wouldn't that have been a part of the
Okay.
original analysis for the cap? Was this included? I don't know if Jared knows.
So, yeah, these are all new.
Oh, these are all new, not existing.
Correct.
Oh, because
Yeah,
not
so maybe the way I structured it, but these are all add-ins. So like all of these waste prevention or reduction strategies are new to be added into the update.
Oh, I didn't get that because non-energy was definitely included in the modeling, but you're saying scrap food waste and some of these other ones weren't included?
They weren't included in like the non-energy last time around.
Yeah, Liz, if your question, my recollection with the pathways modeling was that the non-energy pathways that were modeled were primarily around wastewater and agriculture, and
So not all of these, like that wastewater treatment one would have probably been included, the fugitive emissions.
yeah, I think that my recollection is that was modeled, but I would have to go back and look to be sure. But the things that on the added recommendations that Liz has shared, I don't believe any of that type of activity was modeled.
So I should confirm that?
Yeah, I think
Maybe my
Brian
follow-up.
would know.
Okay.
My guess
right.
is that Rich was heading down the road of if there are recommendations that have been added without such modeling, why are we adding slash, what's the, I mean, it's the same old deal. What's the impact? What's it going to get us? And should it be prioritized as a result, especially given some of the ones that were modeled and haven't yet had action?
Okay. That's helpful.
And
Thanks.
it begs the question of, should it be modeled sometime in the future? But right now, we don't appear to have any information about that, about its benefits. So how we prioritize it is, it's another great idea, a good thing that needs to happen, but we have to somehow set some priorities.
Okay, thanks.
Liz, and that's why I asked the question.
Anything else on this batch? Okay. So the next couple around emission reductions from refrigerants. And I put, so the status here is partially advancing. My understanding is that there is a leak detection program that is occurring with the grant through VIC. However, there isn't a program to fix the leaks when they happen. And so there's a question, I have a question for the group on like how to really like approach this, if there should be a revision on this to keep it as is. And then also in general, looking at these, when I was working with the team on this, there was a question on if we're going to do recommendations around HFCs, should there be a combination of refrigerants and heat pumps if that's also being worked on in the subcommittee. So that's the question I have with these two, and I'll just show the next one so you could see both.
Mm-hmm. On this one, the thermal task group has looked at regulations in terms of minimum standards around refrigerants utilized in heat pumps to avoid high global warming potential refrigerants. I am not yet an expert on that. My understanding is that there are federal rules that are going into force and that Vermont is following those federal standards. And I don't know what ability, if any, we have to set, or if other states are setting more stringent standards than would apply at the federal level. So I think this is an area that's worthy of further research and some coordination between the thermal task group and this non-energy pathways work.
Maybe, I mean, maybe would it be helpful if I joined a thermal task group meeting coming up?
Yeah, and Dave Farnsworth is kind of chairing our task group at this point, so reaching out to him to coordinate on that might be helpful.
Anything else on these?
Thanks, Liz.
No, I mean, so since this was an existing action, Liz, do you know who this was assigned to? Again, I hate to be a broken record on that, but just understanding the lead, I think it's going to be critical for all these actions.
Yeah, I don't have it on the top of my head who was assigned to. Colin seemed to just have a lot of like background on this in general on what was last happening. So that's where I got most of the information from, just in terms of like what grants we currently have going on and whatnot with VIC. Yeah.
I guess this is minor, but on the previous one, I thought I saw, if you don't mind just going back to the, oh yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, thanks. That answers my question. Thank you. Never mind.
Okay. Anything else on these two? Okay, moving on. So, this was also from the last CAP, around semiconductor manufacturing. And, we're still working on these recommendations in terms of like the update of this. We met with Global Foundries to learn about the work they're currently doing around emissions reductions in general. So I'm gonna hopefully, I think, Melissa and I were talking about dates for me to come back, and along with this update, it sounds like I'll have other follow-up to do and other updates as well, but my goal is to have an update on this recommendation to present at that next meeting in November for you all. But I just wanted to let you all know that it's on our radar and we're working through it. Rich?
So I have a question about the mandates being, emission reduction requirements are being met. What is that alluding to? Is that just a pro rata reduction by Global Foundries on path with the economy-wide reductions required by GWSA, or is there a special schedule for Global Foundries?
Not sure.
I don't know if anyone from ANR is on who would know, but my memory is they had a specific either agreement or program with ANR and Global Foundries that served as the basis for that statement in the past CAP. So it might be just a Brian, someone from ANR who was involved, ensuring that that's both accurate, my memory, as well as what it should say this time around, depending upon what's evolved there.
Right.
Thanks, Liz. That's my memory also, but I just want to make sure that what we're alluding to here by saying there are requirements to be met.
I'll check in about that.
I guess this is just a more general question. I'm just wondering, are there other like very specific industrial processes that should be considered with this level of specificity in an additional pathway, or is this really the only exception? I'm saying this as I genuinely don't know. So it's a true question without any agenda.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the non-energy, we don't have, this is the only industry specific one that's there from the last cap. I'm not sure if the subcommittee had other ideas around that in terms of other industry.
My memory from talking to Peter Walk about this, who was head of DEC at the time, was that Global Foundries was, by far the largest single source that we needed to consider in this special way, and for a variety of reasons, including the really strict requirements that they have for the manufacturing process. So that it was considered at that point to be appropriate on the one hand, and also not necessary to have a broader category here. Circumstances might have changed. We have to ask ANR if there are any other entities who should be specifically called out and dealt with in some specifically sensible way.
Yeah, because I was just gonna ask, yeah, and also in terms of future, like ensuring that there's some, or maybe or maybe it's even just setting up a process for identifying them in the future. Oh, Adam, it's a good point. Concrete production. Is that Adam? I don't know who just.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, just this is really interesting, and I would love to know how we, yeah, how we continue to identify those, single point high emitters.
Yeah, we're a little bit limited in not having Brian Woods on the call. I think he will be joining later, but good question. One about just the magnitude of Global Foundries emissions, and then are there other big emitters that should be part of this category? So I think we'll just take that as a follow-up item.
Well, that's all I had for you all today, but thank you so much. This is a lot of good input and direction for me to go off of, and then I'll work with Melissa on coming back at a later date after I do this follow-up. But thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Any final comments from the subcommittee on the presentation?
I would just, to further Adam's point, I mean, I don't know if you want to say anything about the concrete production is interesting, and also just the embodied carbon and other sort of building development projects that aren't specific to buildings and facilities that, are often overlooked when we talk about the transportation sector itself, but are often transportation based. I don't know if you were going to go in a different direction, Adam, but that's an interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the industrial energy of concrete production would be captured in the energy sector, but the curing process releases a lot of CO2, and that probably would be one of these non-energy unclassified categories that we'd want to capture.
You say it's called curing process?
Curing, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I would wonder how much concrete is actually made in Vermont. If you're talking about the process of putting it together, certainly people use it and assemble it. Where along the manufacturing line are we talking about here? I mean, it opens up a can of worms that maybe needs to be open. And hopefully Brian or somebody else has some sense of that, of to what extent manufactured concrete's going on in the state of Vermont.
Yeah, so Liz, sounds like you can take that as an internal follow-up, just getting a little bit more clear on emissions from the non-energy sector and where we potentially need to be devoting our attention to get those reductions.
I mean,
Will do.
globally, CO2 accounts for 8% of global emissions of CO2. Just like it's big.
Yeah, and it's in
Concrete
situ.
specifically, sorry, or non-energy, concrete industry.
Yeah, and I think just like to Gina's point, it's like, I think it's in situ, so it's where it's laid.
Okay, where we're using it, not.
Yeah, so it's
how
the
being
curing as in like
manufactured.
once you've poured it as it cures, right?
That's, tracking that would be. I don't know. DEC, you
Tracking
need to
it's
go think
really-
about this.
Sure, but but that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of conversation around alternative materials. So
For
like
sure, and
alternative
national-
materials to sidewalks, alternative materials to,
Yeah,
even
nat-
in pedestals, a whole bunch, yeah.
Yeah, but nationally, it's a huge issue. Regionally, it's probably a huge issue, whether it's related to the state of Vermont. It's not something within our purview of being able to regulate or have policies or plan around or fund or understand. Those are the things we need to examine if we want to go down that road. That's all. That's my point.
Well, what I'm hearing is that the members of the committee, some members of the committee would like the administration, Liz, and could talk to ANR and find out how big this is. And then we can make a decision as to whether or not we want to examine policies to promote alternative materials, part of the climate action plan. But right now, we just don't have the data.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll do that follow-up.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah. Okay. Moving along. Thanks, Liz, for presenting and for agreeing to follow up. We'll get more to schedule at the end of the meeting, but yes, we are on a weekly meeting basis from this point through that mid-December deadline. And so certainly at a November or December meeting, we'll put this back on the agenda. Yep, getting into crunch time on refining the recommendations. So just pause quickly because we do have our first opportunity for public comment on the agenda. Are there any members of the public here who would like to comment? And maybe Liz, if you could stop your screen share, we'll be able to see everybody. Yeah, there we all are. Not seeing any members of the public. I am going to share, attempt to share quickly some public comment that came in via email consistent with the best practice for subcommittees considering public comment. These comments came in following the thermal sector stakeholder outreach session held a couple of weeks ago. There are a couple that are pretty quick and then one that's a little bit longer that I'll try to summarize. I will just read these first two, I think, directly. I strongly support moving away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. We have a fuel source in our own backyards, which includes solar, wind, geothermal, and very importantly, a renewable wood source. Using modern wood heating makes sense for both our fuel needs and the local economy. Improving the McNeil plant to include a thermal heat component for the community would make that plant so much more efficient. We manage our forests well in Vermont, and the source of wood is not coming from clear cutting, but from management that maintains a balance of age classes. Forests that are 20 to 80 years old are sequestering carbon at the greatest rates. Managing our forests have a range of age classes and can grow older trees while maintaining a high rate of sequestration in the younger age classes. Other modern heat, such as bulk pellets for boiler systems, are an excellent source of fuel. Wood stoves are still valuable, and there's minimal processing prior to BTU output, and they are traditional to Vermont. There's an enormous amount of misinformation coming from the public with good intentions, but who are misinformed about forest management practices in Vermont. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Pellets manufactured in the region should stay in the region. They lose their carbon value when shipped long distances. Keep things bioregional and produce our own thermal heat and electricity. So, clear support for wood resources as a component of our climate action plan.
Melissa, sorry to interrupt. Can you send these as well? Are there names to the commenters?
There are names, and they're public. I'm happy to send these. These just came in this morning from the Climate Action Office. This was Nancy Patch, a Westford, Vermont resident. and I think we can, I was trying to cut and paste. I think a compilation of the comments would be helpful. These were sent as individual email attachments, but absolutely happy to compile and share so that we can have a good sense of where people are landing. And Sophie from the Climate Action Office may be doing some of that. But again, she just sent these to me and Rich this morning to cover during public comment. Next one, I'll attempt to summarize because they touch on a few points, but looking to the future, I rate educating the current workforce in energy efficient technology and building practices as the single most important area to focus attention and resources. So Vermont has lots of people to do the work in the building trades, not enough, but many. They have deep roots in the community. They're frustrated. Essentially, if they only quote know propane and oil fired heating systems, they're never going to recommend a heat pump, even if it may be beneficial to the customer, the town, and the environment. Because why? Because they can still make a living building on what they already know and do well. So increasing awareness and training among our experienced tradespeople is essential in my estimation. So essentially a pitch for workforce and re-educating those who are working currently in the fossil fuel delivered fuels industry. Oh, I said we had 3, but we actually have 4. One more short one that said, hello, A&R, the program looks good. There's one aspect of buildings which should not be overlooked, and that's foundations. Our climate will continue to heat. We will also be receiving exceptional amounts of rain, which will result in significant loss of trees, forests, and soils to exceptionally saturated soils. New construction should have especially deep footings to hold buildings against soil loss around foundations. Needed will be site design to divert water flow away from foundations, roadways, and homes. So getting at building practices. And then last comment that we received in writing expressed. So one of the questions posed at that session was, what are we missing? Equipment used in buildings. And this person recommended deeper exploration of thermal energy networks to capture ground source heat. This commenter related to fuels commented that we should not incentivize so-called advanced wood heating because of pollution, forest degradation, and processing and transportation costs. And then again, another pitch for workforce development is critical. Weatherization is not always an attractive option for recruiting young people. Pay scale will be very important. And some comments around working through the Municipal Energy Resilience Program, the grant-funded program for municipalities that BGS has been running over the past couple of years, that it's been a mixed bag in terms of ease of accessing that program, and a specific recommendation that any program should take staffing capacity of the guiding agency into account, which we've talked a little bit about today. And then we asked a question regarding whether approaches should focus on incentives, regulations, or a combination. And this person said regulations such as no installation of fossil fuel hot water heaters will be permitted if heat pump models are applicable would be wise. Otherwise, incentives are more accepted by the public. So some support for a combination of regulation and incentive. And lastly, posing a question about whether the state could play a role of doing bulk purchases. The instance here would be heat pump water heaters, but I think that concept has been floated for other technologies. But the state could purchase heat pump water heaters and distribute them to low-income folks at no cost and middle-income folks at reduced cost. So again, getting at the incentive end of the equation to help people transition from fossil fuel equipment. So those are the public comments that we received in writing. Any committee discussion, subcommittee discussion on what we're hearing today? Okay.
I just want to
Joey.
recognize I got a bunch of emails from folks that attended or attended the session, and just some of whom I don't know, but just that it was, they appreciated the opportunity to respond directly to the actual drafted strategies, pathways, and actions. And I had a few people comment that they're glad they attended because they had so many more ideas or thoughts than they originally thought they had. So I guess just I'm glad that we stuck to our priority in sharing the actual draft, because I know that wasn't directly asked of us. And in this from the consultant. So I'm really glad that we did that.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And that's encouraging feedback to receive, and it's a good segue into our transportation discussion. But Joey, did you want to jump in?
Oh, just that I got to attend most of it and I just found it really well facilitated and run, and the thermal team did such a great job, and the comments were so, I just found them to be very useful and constructive, just like the comments you just read, Melissa. Thanks for reading them. So as we segue into the transportation conversation, hopefully we're setting the table for that level of value add from people and practitioners.
Great, yeah, let's go there. And yeah, we don't have a lot of our buildings and thermal folks on the line. We only have a couple today, but they did do a phenomenal job in preparing for the meeting and presenting in that meeting, and also leaving a lot of space for stakeholder feedback. So Joey or Gina, are you going to walk us through the transportation draft recommendations as they stand now?
Well, we had hoped to have our group meet during this meeting because several of us didn't think this meeting was going on. And now we're going to meet after this meeting to finalize that. I mean, we can talk about it generally, but we don't have anything written down in total. We have bits and pieces. Joey, I mean, do you want to?
I mean, we have some very drafty recommendations.
Draft is a good word.
Yeah, and I don't know how much far evolved they will get before the 7th, but I don't have a nice tidy PowerPoint like Liz just shared. But I'm happy to sort of hit the high level, if that's all right with you all, and definitely want to lean into this team's expertise for ideas that are not captured. But just like to bring people back, people remember that last time the initial climate action plan, we had 4 pathways. Pathway 1 and pathway 2 had to do with reducing emissions. I can't remember the exact terminology. In pathway 1, light duty vehicles, pathway 2, heavy duty vehicles. We merged those into one pathway about reducing greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles writ large. So collapsing light and heavy duty into one pathway. I'm going to go through in more detail some of the ideas, but then we have 2 other pathways. The second pathway being lowering the carbon intensity of fuels. And people may remember that there was one, I think only one action under that was joining TCIP, the Transportation Climate Initiative Program. And then we have a third pathway, which is reducing vehicle miles traveled. So we essentially have 3 big buckets of strategies, and there's a lot of opportunity for we have 3 big pathways, and then there's a lot of opportunity for various strategies and actions under them. But some of the things that we're talking about relate to in pathway 1, again, reducing GHG from vehicles, sort of continuing to monitor and maintain Vermont's adoption of the California Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, maintaining identicality with California. People recall that that is the program that would obligate vehicle manufacturers to deliver a higher and higher percentage of clean electric vehicles to Vermont over time, and by 2035 delivering 100% new electric vehicles into Vermont. So maintaining sort of commitment to that program, although we're also considering potential contingency to that recommendation if there is any likelihood that either a new federal administration or Supreme Court revokes California's waiver for that program. So placeholder for exploring that a little bit further. Then also exploring advanced clean fleets. So we've successfully participated in Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks. recommending exploration of advanced clean fleets, and we know there's a lot there. So looking forward to hearing more from the public and determining whether or not that recommendation or moving towards it makes sense. A few other, so there's some actions related to the sort of that bucket of sort of advanced clean cars, trucks, and fleets. Then strategy number 2 sort of relates to light and heavy duty vehicle electric purchase incentives. Really relating to ensuring long-term consistent sufficient funding for core programs. And then we are exploring the concept of encouraging VTrans in collaboration with the Public Service Department and Public Utility Commissions to sort of design and deliver high mileage user vehicle incentive programs that really maximize cost-cutting outcomes for the consumers and pollution reducing benefits from the incentive program. So again, more about like consistent funding for EV incentive programs and other programs that are really focused on helping Vermonters, especially low and moderate income Vermonters, adopt and access higher mileage, cleaner electric vehicles like Mileage Smart. We're talking about looking at like opportunities to electrify medium heavy duty vehicle auxiliary systems. So related to things like hybrid electric bucket trucks and electric transportation refrigeration units, so that when service providers who are using big equipment like this don't have to necessarily idle. So buckets related in that world. And then we've been spending, we also still have on the table sort of this concept of a vehicle efficiency price adjuster fee-bate, which had been recommended in the initial climate action plan, and is still, we're still putting it on the table as a potential incentive, disincentive, just a program to raise revenue, shift the types of investments Vermonters make. Strategy number 5 that we're really spending a lot more time on, and we need to round up more, is related to sort of investment in and maintenance of electric vehicle supply equipment. So really leaning into how do we build out a charging network? Really want to lean into the electric sector's team too, and we've been doing some due diligence to think about how do we leverage and maximize managed charging benefits, looking at some best practices or approaches that other states are using to ensure that like EV owners are are we tracking EV ownership versus EV owners' participation in managed charging programs that again reduce costs, enhance grid benefits, and really sort of maximize the benefits of managed charging programs for themselves and for the grid. So looking at some of those kinds of different strategies, and then thinking through sort of how can we aim for the recommendations related to like consistent EV rates and incentives across all utilities to ensure equitable access and benefits. We sort of talked a little bit about, are there tailored obligations that could be phased in for different utilities, knowing that our utilities serve very different parts of Vermont and are very different, organized very differently. So again, one of the core components being like, how do we help all Vermonters, no matter where you live, access cleaner or electric vehicles? And this is under the bucket of EVSE charging or potentially under the bucket of incentive programs. And we have some more just ideas that we need to refine, and we'll be talking with a couple of other experts, and ideally we will have these more refined by next week when we can get input from other people and you all. But another big bucket is just sort of this concept of how do we make sure that the electric vehicle supply equipment that is installed is maintained. So potentially some thinking around establishing requirements or some other ways to ensure that installers you know, our offer timely continued maintenance of EV charging equipment to ensure public safety, consumer confidence, you know, access to EV chargers when they need it, especially for rural reaches, really important. And then looking into strategies for charging solutions for people who rent or live in multifamily units, and charging solutions potentially uniquely tailored for rural communities. And then I think last big concept at this moment is sort of the concept of like a right to charge, which is really important for multifamily units and renters in particular. And then consistent, I will turn it over to Gina to talk about a little high level of the vehicle miles traveled strategies, but consistent throughout, as we did in the initial climate action plan, carrying forward this concept of we need a core regulatory or policy framework to sort of support all these kinds of programs and drive the transition and certain pollution reduction benefits. So we really have flagged that we need to look to the results of the Cap and Invest sort of transportation study analysis underway, VTrans and ANR and consultants to look at what is a best or preferred or, you know, strategy for policy regulatory framework for the transportation sector. And then we will also look to sort of this, you know, what are the results of the other study, which is looking at a sustainable funding source for transportation writ large, as our gas tax and our current shifting mechanisms, our current funding mechanisms are shifting, and we're not raising as much revenue as we used to with more efficient electric vehicles. So those are high level buckets for pathway 1 and pathway 2. Related to electrification and lowering the carbon intensity of fuels. And then our big other pathway is transportation demand management strategies and providing solutions other than a vehicle to get people where they need to go. So any questions before I turn it over to Gina? Sorry, that was really long.
Yeah, it looks like Rich has
Joey,
one.
thank you. Now, if my hand can be seen because the internet, but a couple of questions. Have you considered the question of creating a statewide pool of funding for incentives for EVs that would be coming from the electric sector? You know, in addition to the way that the charging infrastructure is paid for across multiple utilities. You mentioned the problem of, you know, a state being divided up into different service territories, and then within those service territories, the incentives for EVs can vary. But it would be possible to have a single statewide program that would support it on a pro rata basis by all the utilities, akin to the way Efficiency Vermont is supported. Has anybody been discussing that for supporting EV incentives from the power sector?
That has not come up, at least in any significant way, but I see Liz has her hand up. If this is I mean, I would just say here too, like we have a task group and we're leaning into you know, I just outlined some of the ideas that we have. There are not a lot of big ones like that we've explored, Rich, but we are also eager to lean into your expertise and ideas for what should be on the table. Liz?
I don't, oh,
Yeah,
go
Jean,
ahead.
next.
Go
No,
ahead,
no,
Liz.
no.
Well, I just want the rest of the committee to know that we have a funding crisis now with incentives. The programs that the state relied on, which we relied on in the last cap, are no longer available to us. And the state was not successful in getting a grant to support further incentives. So there is a crisis going on. If in fact we want to continue some sort of state incentive program, we've got to find some resources to do that. And that's going to be made very clear in this cap, I hope.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. So Liz, was yours a question or more on the role of electric utilities?
I was going to answer one question Joey asked, and then I'm happy to, respond on anything else. But you had asked Joey about a recommendation around keeping a track of or requiring a percentage of managed charging. And I just wanted you to know that for at least GMP, which has, and I think this is true of BED as well, you could check with Darren. Everyone just yesterday filed reports with the commission on their current EV rates and programs. So that would be a ready, recent source from all the utilities on information on what they have. But at least for GMP and I believe BED, both of which have managed charging programs, there is data on, and we are required to track data on effective uptake essentially, and then have strategies over time to ensure that that stays strong or stronger. They are already strong. So just wanted you to know that's already in play. So if you do mention it, you can have it be more like a, continue sort of recommendation.
Okay, that is super helpful to know. Thank you for that. And just anecdotally, do you have a sense of like, if there are like in GMP territory, 10,000 registered electric vehicles, of those 10,000, 8,000 Vermonters?
I know the percentage of the people who have the charging, like in other words, anyone who could be eligible for the charging, which has to, have, they have to have gotten a charger that works, but the uptake is, I think the report yesterday said it was 70%-ish for GMP. But that's not quite the question you asked, because not all electric vehicles, if it's particularly older models that perhaps they never put a level 2 charger in, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a percentage of folks who we know have chargers that could be managed, what the uptake is on getting the discount rate. But anyway, I don't need to remember anecdotally. We could look at those reports from yesterday and get the exact percentages. But the bottom line is it is managed. And utilities are also required, I believe the department now requires this as a part of the electric plan IRP requirements, to do modeling on how managed charging or not managed charging affects the distribution grid. And certainly that's something that we do so that we can keep track of that very thing.
That's super helpful and really great to hear.
Yeah, so those are probably more continue. And then on Rich's other points, sure, things could be funded that way. General low-income support programs have not successfully gone through that way. And so I would just caution, not surprisingly, probably from a both equity and affordability point of view, putting those types of programs on electric customers.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Liz. Jared, I think you had the next hand.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I was just going to go back to Rich's question about whether we had discussed as a possible recommendation, what he outlined, and just building on what Joey said, no. So it's helpful to hear that. And if you have specific suggestions, happy to look at those and discuss those. I will say, though, that we have identified, we took the first step, which was identifying the problem. We didn't take the second step of identifying what possible solutions would be, but we have had task group discussion that very clearly is concerned about the inconsistent access to incentives and EV rates by utility territory and what that means for equitable access and the ability to access EVs and lower charging rates, and the extent to which the folks who are most energy cost burdened and who drive the most miles could get equitable access to those incentives and rates. That is something that we generally are very supportive of, but hadn't really identified the mechanisms and the means yet.
I put up my hand, but I'd be happy to send you all the easy way to find all that information that was literally just filed, because that would really help with that. And also just put in just there's been a lot of study on income levels and other socioeconomic factors among different utility territories as a part of the low income docket that the PUC had. And overall, there's data on that should anyone need it. Pretty recent data, I think it was 2022 or 3. So, pretty recent. And, the overall story there is, it really is a very rural state. So, other than very small municipal utilities that might have a more specific demographic, almost across the board, it's a pretty similar mix overall, because our utility territories, even large ones like GMP, have just really large rural areas of poverty throughout the state, right? So anyway, just to take that perception sort of away from this idea that there are certain utilities that are different than others, it really, from a socioeconomic point of view, deserves a little bit more study on that, or looking at the data on that before saying it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It was just as a quick follow-up to clarify, my suggestion was less that the demographics by utility are significantly different, and more that the utility incentives and EV rates offered by utility are significantly different.
Yeah, that's true. That's true at this time. And for sure, looking at those reports, there are some technical barriers that certain utilities have. Others are in process right now. So it's a good snapshot. I remember, for example, Stowe indicated that it would be filing soon for its rates based upon some rate design work they're doing now. BED and GMP have it. VEC had some responses as well. Yeah, so it would be good to have those.
Thanks for sharing that information.
Sure.
That'll be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And just to clarify, that's coming out of the Flexible Load Management Working Group that's being jointly run with the utilities and the EEUs, right?
Are you talking about the reports that I'm mentioning?
The filings, yeah, or were those
No.
related to the EV rate docket?
It's actually the PUC yesterday had all the utilities file for their next report, which includes info on the rates they already have, the uptake of the programs, the plans they have in the future to file rates if they don't have conforming rates. And then they have a section this year on what utilities are doing to support infrastructure upgrades relevant to EVs. So it's that, and there is some overlap. Melissa's right. There's other places where similar data is being utilized, but yesterday's filings are just an easy snapshot. They're pretty short filings, so they'll be easy to just skim through.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. My point was I wanted to flag for this group, which may not be aware, that there is this flexible load working group that's been convened and touches on a lot of the topics that we've been touching on. So anyway, we'll get to this at the end, but Rich and I had previously discussed getting some time with the distribution utilities, because so many of our potential recommendations touch on their work and their regulatory structure. So,
and Melissa, to that, and definitely Liz, thank you for sending those. Does the Flexible Load Management Working Group have any, or will they, any recommendations?
They will. I will have to get back to the timing. That's a working group convened here at the department by Philip Pica and Ann Margolis, and that came out of not the DU's regulatory process, but the Energy Efficiency Utilities Demand Resources Plan proceeding, which happens every 3 years. So we are in year 1 of their 3-year plan. So I think those recommendations are slated to come out, but they will not, I don't think, be out in time for this cap update. That makes sense. Dealing with a lot of different timelines.
But we could potentially reference them as a body of work that should be.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm not close to that work, but we could certainly see what the status is. And I think they were recently inventorying. That's what my question to Liz was. They recently took an inventory of what are all of the load management programs out there. So that would span EVs as well as other technologies. What do different utilities have in place, and what is the uptake of those? So we can definitely tap into that group, and I can take that as a follow-up here. Sam.
Yeah, and a few other things, but based on this most recent conversation, I really appreciate the points about Jared and also Liz, and then also Liz, your point, I I did try to look at some of the income across distribution utility and found the same thing that you just said, but I will point out that at least in central Vermont, we do have one utility mostly along the transportation corridors and then others filling in the spaces. So, and just in our case, it happens to be that those folks who are farther away from the main thoroughfares, so typically are driving more on most of their drives, do in this specific case have less access to both EV charging at home and to higher rates of incentives. So just I do think there are some more things, and I'm glad that we're looking at some of those things. What I wanted to say actually was I just having a few questions, and thanks, Joe. You gave a great rundown of all the things there, so I might have misheard or missed some things, but. In terms of the rural charging, I just like maybe just a few ideas of things I've heard out in some of our more rural towns that are as they're trying to do their transportation sections of their own town plans. There is an interest in the solar flex chargers, so the idea of having chargers that are not grid dependent. So I just bring that up as something to consider. I understand again that means that we're losing the demand management side of of that, but also you don't need it as much. So, anyways, I'll just flag that and that I know that that's only one small sort of new area, but their performance in extreme weather has been pretty good, and that's the main question that I've been asked to ask about them. And so just as it didn't occur to me, and then I had a bunch of folks in some of our more rural towns talking about them, so that was interesting. So I'll just share that. And then the other thing that has been talked a lot about in terms of when EVs come up in our more rural towns, there is this idea of it always comes up in tangent with like micro public transportation, and there's a lot of challenges, especially economic, with that. But one of the things that does come up is the discussion around having a transportation hub. So whether it be a small fleet that is shared, and then there's like a hub that has more of a community space to hang out, to wait, to whatever, to charge, etc. So just and this is really probably not unconnected from the emphasis in some of these towns on helping their general store survive. So just in terms of some of these other sort of community planning things that might sort of be complementary. I just thought I'd mention that. The other thing maybe is also there's a lot of interest from towns in EV school buses, but coordination with school districts has been really challenging. And that's just different. They're just different people making decisions. And so that might be something that could be touched upon. I don't know. Maybe it's not a big enough impact, but maybe that's under your fleet thing that you might think about. And I think that's all I had, just ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Go ahead, Rich.
So, Joey, going back to the big picture, there's obviously a lot of focus here on electric vehicles. You mentioned in passing, I think, the idea of paying attention to the carbon content of fuels that are used, especially, of course, during the transition when a lot of the emissions from transportation are still going to be due to combustion fuels. And I'm asking whether the task group is going to be looking to the study regarding cap and invest, or whether there's also going to be some consideration of a low carbon fuel standard in your thinking. I didn't get it from your presentation whether expectation that
Yes.
by itself.
Sorry, I sort of blew past some of that, but like I mentioned, we're gonna try and probably carry forward in each pathway, like was in the climate action plan, this like we need a primary regulatory or policy tool, and look to that study to inform what that is. And as you know, it's looking at cap and invest, also looking at a low carbon fuel standard. And then we do have The only other action that we have is labeled as a potential new action under lowering the carbon intensity of fuels is considering establishing a clean fuel standard. And as you can see here, as informed by the greenhouse gas policy analysis to lower the, so yes, we do have that flagged and that needs to be informed by the analysis underway at the moment. Jared, do you want to, you came off mute. Do you want to say anything more about that? But sorry, I was blowing through it very quickly when it, anyone else want to say anything? But it's on our radar.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Joey. And I want to make sure we have time for Gina to finish up with the potential recommendations so we can dive into our prep for next week's session.
Okay, ready? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
So we've got this pathway, or excuse me, yeah, it is a pathway of VMT reduction. And the way to think about that is making the movement of people and goods more efficient. And we have 6 strategies, and I'll quickly go through them. And then I'll do the actions as I describe the strategies. So first of all, promoting smart growth, aka concentrated mixed use development, or growing in place through revitalization and new development that is less car dependent. That is our smart growth strategy. Now, the last time around, we asked that VTrans look at the emissions benefits of smart growth, and a study was just completed this year. It's very important for us to keep our eye on in this report, and it demonstrates that 15% of emissions will be reduced by the 2050 if the state focuses on smart growth, which is the state's land use policy. And conversely, sprawl or rural development will have an equal negative effect. So it's important that we continue with a smart growth strategy. The actions, and we're keeping them fairly high level with the understanding that smart growth is being looked at the multi-group level, and hopefully, and I'm sitting on that committee, we'll be able to delve into more details in the overarching smart growth recommendations. So we have 4 at this point. One is to monitor Act 181, which is the Act 250 legislation that is going to allow give a lot more resources to the regions to do municipal planning, which will help with smart growth planning. I could talk about that for an hour, but we won't right now. We're going to stick with the notion of directing state and federal infrastructure planning and other funding to downtown and village centers. And then thirdly, working across state agencies and across RPCs and across municipalities on all smart growth related programs and policies. And this again is one of those big things that will have a whole lot of detail underneath that will belong in other plans, but needs to be brought out in the climate plan. And then finally, we need more VMT. We need more research to understand the VMT implications of numerous state policies and mandates, such as regional dispersion of job centers. This is coming out of the smart growth study. Mandated consolidation of education, mandated consolidation of healthcare. What does that mean in terms of VMT and the amount people are driving around? The second strategy is to increase access to broadband to support telework, telemedicine, and other functions that avoid vehicle trips. And in this, we understand there's a whole lot of work going on around this. We need to incorporate what those actions are in this plan. The third strategy starts, and a lot of our work around this is we've been sharing ideas with staff in VTrans who are directly involved in transportation planning and funding, and their expertise is critically important because they understand those programs. Many of them are federal, many of them are very complicated, but they're the key to investing in the right way in alternative modes. So we need to, in short, develop state, regional, and local capacity to undertake transportation and planning and investment. And we have 4 strategies there, or 4 actions. Establish a VMT reduction performance measure if possible under VTran's federal transportation planning program. This is being talked about nationally, and it's important if that goes, that VTrans be a participant. We're going to support the RPCs and municipalities develop local and regional multimodal transportation planning and investment priorities through the VTrans TPI program, which is the Transportation Planning Initiative. There's also been significant planning around wise investment in bike ped, and that too should be incorporated in these planning efforts. And then we want to continue asking for a sustainable transportation plan that addresses actions, available funding, and investment implementation. So that's across modes. Right now, a lot of performance analysis gets done on conventional transportation planning around roads and bridges. We would like to make sure that there's equal amount of focus on the alternative modes through those planning efforts. And then finally, we have a crisis in transit funding, and we need to figure out a way to have a sustainable source of transit funding. Now, one thing that's important to point out around alternative modes, particularly transit and particularly transit. And by transit, I mean buses in all their forms, including school buses and other conventional buses. Since the CAP, VTrans conducted a carbon reduction strategy. And what that revealed to us is that many of VTrans's funding programs around transit and rail and bike ped, the bang for the buck in terms of emissions is not very great unless those vehicles are powered with electricity. And this is something we have to reckon with, because there's a huge demand for these programs because of health, because of access to transportation for those who can't afford to have a car, for the economy. We need to have these modes, but right now, emissions reductions is not proving to be what we're the greatest benefit from these programs. But we need to continue talking about them in this plan. We're committed to that because that is where the public is asked us to go. We want to include, so that's the strategies under planning and investment for transit. We want to increase the availability, use, and knowledge of options for people to decrease single occupancy vehicle trips. So this is transportation demand management in a formal sense. Let's support our carpooling programs, microtransit, the state's commitment to Amtrak. We need to continue on that road, and we need to make sure the public understands the benefits of those programs. Finally, the 5th one is increasing walking and biking to most effectively replace vehicle trips. This is the most efficient way to reduce emissions through the movement of people. And in order to do that most effectively, given the state's limited and municipalities and the region's limited resources to build better sidewalks, to build better bike paths, is we need to collect better data on use, where and how are these facilities being used, so that we can better inform state and federal investment. We prioritize funding in downtowns and village centers, and we continue to assess the VTrans Complete Streets program, which lays out the standards for these facilities. And then finally, shifting freight movement from 100% truck, which is the situation now, to freight rail. Freight rail is extremely more efficient than truck, but it only works for certain commodities. And the actions around that strategy we're still fleshing out. But by next week, we'll have something that we can share with the public on freight movement. Any questions? I wished I had something to show you in writing today. it's coming soon.
Thanks, Gina. Any questions on the VMT pathway? Comments? Okay. So I think our next action item here would be to brainstorm as a group. And I don't know if the Transportation Task Group has a list of questions in mind that you want to go to stakeholders with, but I wanted to make sure we spent some time getting subcommittee ideas around kind of how to frame that discussion. And then just as I think you all have seen the template for slides for the presentation and kind of the suggested essentially run of show. I think it's about 25 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes of presentation and opening up for comments. Next week's session will be facilitated similar to the thermal sector session last week. And we can certainly have another follow-up next week. I think there was some interest in that with the facilitator in advance of that session. But as much as we can use today's time to get you all what you need to make the session productive, I'd love to do that with the subcommittee members that we have.
We, Joey and I haven't had a chance to talk about this, but we have seen the questions that were prepared for the thermal sector, and we're envisioning, and we're going to meet right after this meeting to pin this down, a similar set focus, if you will, not the same questions, obviously, but the way that they're laid out makes a lot of sense, you know, in terms of how are the policies working? How can we improve them? Do you favor approaches that focus on incentives, regulations, or some combination? That's a good way to approach this as well.
Great, yeah.
Funding.
That's the one I'm going to always make a pitch for, funding.
It cuts across.
Good, yeah, so it sounds like we have a good working template that can be tapered, catered. Jared, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, in reply to your prompt, Melissa, about questions for the input session, I mean, to the extent that it would be similar to the thermal one that was done earlier, I thought that some of the most helpful feedback was in response to either an explicit or implicit question is what might we be missing? Just for example, when we had the thermal input session, somebody said, there's a lot of challenges around federal rules and recommendations. And so this topic came up around, should we be making explicit recommendations on how those should be updated to better work for Vermont? Not that we have direct control over that, but it might be helpful for federal agencies or a congressional delegation to have that identified and enshrined in our official statewide climate action plan. So yeah, what's missing? And then the other thing would be feedback on key considerations around the draft recommendations in terms of their implementation. Considerations around practical issues, timeline issues, weighing equity issues. So to me, it's really those two big buckets for where we're at in the process. We want to make sure we're not missing anything, and we want to see if there's key feedback of important considerations on the things that are on paper.
Thanks. Yeah, those are really good points, and hopefully part of that will be addressed by who we get in the room, right? Who we get in the virtual room. I will say we got great feedback in the buildings and thermal sector. One party that's been missing, which again I think we should talk more about, has been the electric utilities, and I think especially anywhere to Jared's point about are there practical implications? So anytime we can get implementers, those who are going to carry out the actual work that the council's recommending, I think that feedback really needs to be kind of highlighted and emphasized there. So part of it, again, is getting the right folks there and then framing up those questions. So I think that's a great question to add around potential challenges and how do we address challenges. Any other thoughts on what?
I would just suggest that we frame it more neutrally than that in terms of considerations, because there might be challenges, there might be opportunities as well.
Fair enough.
I guess I'm curious. I can't remember if I feel like I had provided some suggestions on who was directly, like who the target invites were. But it might be useful to consider reaching out to at least like, a few road crews also. Like there also is a lot. I mean, the road budgets are a huge part at the municipal level I mean, they're a huge part of most of our budgets, and they're also, I would say, along with insurance, building and employee, are the part of the budget that's expanding the most. And I do think that part of that is also responding to changes in our climate, and especially with all of our unpaved roads. And there are implications there for increased emissions from increased travel associated with a lot of that work. And I just don't know if that's something that we also might want to flag or discuss at all. I know it's not conventionally part of many greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategies, but addressing like potential increase in emissions from a sort of a standard yearly source might be something to consider. And I don't exactly know what we do about that. I mean, I know at the regional level, we've talked about, we are rapidly looking at the closure of all of our gravel pits. And, so people are trucking gravel from really far now, which is obviously increasing sort of the emissions associated with just doing regular maintenance, not to mention in the recovery scenario when people have to go really far out of state for that. So there are just some things like that that I maybe seem really quotidian and really small scale, but all of our towns are probably facing to some extent or another. I don't know. I don't know if would be interesting at all to talk about or have somebody in the room that might be thinking about, but just something that came to mind.
Thanks, Sam. I think the resilience group, and if Andrea were here, she's leading that up. Andrea Wright couldn't make it. This is very much on, well, the whole idea of roads and bridges at the local level, very much on their mind. I think we need to see what comes out of that before we start looking at VMT reduction around gravel movement. The best case scenario would be how many of those trucks can be electrified, but we're not there yet. I think we need to look at much bigger issues at this point. But thank you for raising that. And it will be very interesting to see what resilience comes out with around the types of issues you just described. I think one thing that we have to make clear in our presentation is this newfound information through the carbon reduction strategy of the actual emissions benefits of alternative modes at this point in time, and getting the public to understand that is going to be really challenging and important to do. And I don't know to what extent the CCRPC or the regional planning commissions are engaging in those conversations as we reach out to the public. That's going to be critical in the name of climate change emissions reductions. Running more empty buses isn't going to get us there.
Yeah, Rich.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to echo what Gina just said. I think it is important for us to in the context of presenting these options to people, show them where the tons are and where the tons aren't. And recognizing that I think everybody on this committee would say there are really important resilience issues associated with transportation. There are important health and equity issues, as touched on earlier in this call. And so not to gainsay those important factors, but just to, at the same time, tell people that we're not going to meet our emission reduction goals through these VMT strategies. And so it's just important that the public understands that. And we can ask people what they think about that. Nevertheless, you know, the tons aren't there, so where should our priorities lie?
I mean, we can say we'll have much healthier, nicer communities with these strategies.
Oh, there's lots of positive things to say.
I know, it's just,
And
it's our conundrum. It pushes the issue of electrification. Because a lot of those, if those empty buses were running on electricity, that would be better, a lot better. So electrification is really what this is all about, and cleaning up fuels to the extent we can. Now,
Those buses might not be empty though if they weren't, if they were cost effective for riders though. I mean, I understand that the cost predicament, I'm not at all advocate. I understand it's extremely difficult in a state like ours to operate public transportation in a cost effective way. I totally get that. Not arguing at all. But I will say that I rode the bus regularly when it was free. I mean, 4 times a week. And the ridership wasn't mostly commuters. It was folks who otherwise wouldn't have had access to transportation. And so I guess totally getting rid, I mean, yeah, so it'd be best if they were running on, if they were EV and, but I don't know how we make that work. So, but yes, no, I hear the point. I hear the point.
I think the smart growth study is really, really great, and that we do now have a better quantified handle on what the benefits are of achieving the state's land use goals around emissions reductions. That's a good thing that we need to roll out to the public.
Yep, so using these stakeholder sessions as an opportunity to inform as much as solicit input. Yeah, Joey.
It would be helpful to have a conversation with a facilitator. I don't know if we want to schedule that now or just do it via email, but one thing that I do think is important, and the role of the facilitator would help provide this, is just, I mean, we have so many things that we want to do, and you know, we can reprioritize existing dollars or raise revenue for the kinds of investments we need or want to make. But I just want to make sure that, like, when people make recommendations for things that we should be doing, we also need to answer the question, how are we going to pay for that? You know, I think we've done some of these sessions before and people have all kinds of great ideas, and yes, we should do these things, but we need a mechanism to do them or to afford them. I just think I really want to be very helpful for me to hear from people, like, how do we take these priorities and actually make them reality? I don't want to let those kinds of things, not that everyone has to have the answers, but I just welcome people's insights if they have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for flagging that. It's something that it's a top consideration from my perspective as well. I don't want what we present up to the council to be essentially a wish list of these would all be great things if we could have them, and very low prospects that they will, you know, the majority of them get funded or move forward. We did pose that question specifically in the buildings and thermal group, didn't get a heck of a lot of meaty, actionable recommendations. You know, one was a wealth tax, one was higher taxes on second homeowners in Vermont. You know, that was kind of the range of recommendations that we got, but I absolutely think it's worth raising again with the transportation stakeholders and David can, so yes to meeting with David. I think we can follow up offline on that. He does share like his calendar of availability, so we can easily schedule half an hour with him next week, with or without me and Rich. I don't want to be an impediment to that. And then just while we're on logistics, I think Liz had asked that slides be shared by Monday, hoping that that's reasonable. And ideally, we'd get questions out as well, you know, by Tuesday for a Thursday session, so that I think that does help people come prepared with their thoughts and their input.
Melissa, I can't get access to the templates. So,
Liz, do you have any insight there?
Are you using your partner email to log in?
no, do I need to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Apologies. I know it's annoying, but that is the trick. And then if you still can't get after that, send me an email and there's more steps I could share with you.
Okay, I'll give that a go.
Yeah, sorry, I know that has been a challenge for non-state folks, but we will work through getting you the template one way or another.
Well,
Um,
I'll try the partner thing. I should have. thought of
And I won't speak for everyone else, and maybe I will aim for Monday if we need to deliver on Tuesday morning. I hope that's okay. It's just a lot to sift through. So we'll do our best to deliver on Monday.
Thank you, Joey. Yeah, Liz, anything else you want to share about timeline? That's what my recollection was for these sessions.
I think that's right.
Yeah, okay. Great, and we'll try to get some time with the facilitator in advance of the meeting. Okay. So I think we've gone as far as we could with this topic. Not seeing members of the public. I don't think we have public comment. So I think we're in our section of next steps and wrap up. Where are we? Next steps and wrap up. Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning, so the December 19th meeting is looming large of the full council. That is when cross-sector has been asked to present recommendations. I think there are a couple of steering committee meetings before then, so we may get additional guidance from the council, but that's the timeline on which we're operating now. Next week, of course, at this time, we'll be in the transportation input session. That leaves 4 cross-sector subcommittee meetings before that December council meeting. Rich and I spoke earlier this week and, essentially think we'll need 1 full meeting for each of the 3 sectors to work through our prioritization and fleshing out these recommendations. The task groups have done a huge amount of work in compiling recommendations, and I think we're really at the refinement, revision, potentially culling stage. A reminder that getting back to the logistics, we do have the Excel template where we're going to need to put our recommendations into that format. It should be familiar because I think it's the format from last time, where we have the pathway strategies and actions, and then it also allows for kind of the ranking around the 5 criteria by which we prioritize recommendations. And I think that work of getting the draft recommendations into the template also needs to happen, certainly in advance of the council meeting, ideally in advance of when the subcommittee reviews recommendations. Again, Rich and I are going to be meeting with David Plum from CBI, who will likely facilitate some of those meetings around prioritization for us. I think just my sense of where folks are with things, we probably put buildings and thermal towards the sooner end of the schedule, and transportation a little bit later, and potentially electricity in the middle there. We will certainly share that information as we plan out those agendas. And let's see. Last thing, again, as I alluded to earlier, and Rich in my discussion, I mean, hearing a lot of the discussion that we're having around the electric sector, I think it's really critical to get the distribution utilities linked into this subcommittee, since we are not doing a specific outreach session for the electric sector, right? We're doing transportation and thermal. And the idea was that electricity is kind of an undercurrent for both of those. But like I said, at the buildings and thermal session, we did not get a strong DU turnout. Hopefully we will at transportation. But we did think about essentially getting a presentation of the electric sector recommendations to the DUs and soliciting their input probably during a cross-sector meeting. We're not scheduling any more broader stakeholder sessions. So that was a lot. Welcome subcommittee reaction to any and all of those items. Yeah, Rich, of course, dive in.
Well, thank you. That was a really good summary. I agree with the point that we should carve out some time on one of our subcommittee meetings to specifically discuss the electric sector policies and invite DU representatives and others interested in the sector to participate. As you say, we don't need to schedule a separate standalone stakeholder session, but we really should make sure that our power sector recommendations have been heard and we get some response from distribution utilities and others with an interest in that sector.
Seems like maybe there would be it might be great to invite at least someone from resilience as well, if they're focusing on a lot of local issues. And I mean, I don't know where reliability and stuff might come into it, but maybe at least make the offer.
Andrea's on resilience.
Yeah, I agree with that, Sam.
Yep, good point. And we will also, so just to be really clear, okay, because there was some confusion about today's meeting. We are now meeting weekly. With the exception of next week, which during this session, we have the transportation stakeholder meeting. We are having weekly meetings through December, essentially December 12th, because I believe the 19th is the full council meeting. Is that
16th.
right?
The 16th.
Sorry, the 16th.
And maybe you said it, Melissa, with the exception of Thanksgiving.
With the exception of Thanksgiving, we are meeting weekly straight through December 19th. We'll keep the December 19th meeting on our calendars. And then after the council meeting, we'll essentially regroup. But for the next, whatever that is, 10 weeks, we should be seeing each other at this time and this place on, regularly, obviously skipping November 28th for the Thanksgiving holiday. And I do expect at least one or two of those meetings will likely be a hybrid or, given an in-person option. We talked about that a little bit at our last meeting. I think there'd be value in having us face-to-face to the extent that people can. That would likely be at A&R. The department's hybrid technology is not in a place that I want to offer it up for use. So once we speak with the facilitator and figure out agenda topics for those upcoming meetings, I do think some of them will likely have a hybrid option. Yeah, Liz, go ahead.
That all sounds good. Two things. The electric sector, kind of core group, one for each utility sort of thing, did receive the invites to the various meetings. But I think part of the impression, maybe partly borne out by buildings, although it was a really good meeting there was quite a bit of engagement, but there was reluctance by the utilities to come in and they want people from the public to be able to speak, right? And so it's not like that forum seemed like the most productive in terms of sharing the type of information on the more detailed policies, like we talked through some of them today. So if we're going to do what Rich mentioned, and Melissa, I think you mentioned about getting those folks in, it would be good to figure out which of the meetings so that we can coordinate that as soon as possible, just so they have it on their schedule. And then my second question is actually semi-unrelated, so I apologize. Can someone tell me, because I've totally missed it, whether this meeting that showed up on my calendar for tomorrow related to Cap and Invest is a part of the Climate Council process or not? I think it looks to me like the entire Climate Council was invited. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian or Liz, do you have anything you can share, or Joey? So I also have that meeting on my calendar, the Cap and Invest Study Environmental Focus Group. Go ahead, Liz, do you have any?
This is to inform the study underway, looking at, Cap and Invest and other solutions, the low carbon fuel standard for transportation, and then writ large, this is what we've been asking for in our Cap addendum. I thought it was just an environmental focus group, but clearly they're thinking that the entire Climate Council is the environmental focus group. I don't really understand that, but yeah, so I didn't know it was on everyone's calendars. As the environmental rep, it made sense that it was on mine, but I don't know what to tell you.
I think for this group, it would be good to go and learn about the work that's being done, because ultimately we're going to have to evaluate it. So it's a chance to participate.
I think you gave me what I need, which is it at least is a part of that same process. This isn't some separate process or
No.
different group.
Right.
It's all connected.
Got it. It's legit.
Yeah. It's like the real deal with the consultants and everything, so if you can swing it.
I like the real deal.
There aren't that many opportunities. Come if you can.
But Joey, is this different from the, like the TAC group?
This is the manifestation of the tax work. It's a public meeting to get input from stakeholders in the environmental arena.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so thanks, Liz, for the questions, and yes, good point about getting on. Okay, so this is just in, sorry. So apparently tomorrow's session is being canceled, postponed. I had heard murmurings about that, but Jane and the Climate Action Office just confirmed that. So a further wrinkle in the Cap and Invest session.
The Cap and Invest session has been canceled?
Cap and Invest Study Environmental Focus Group. Is potentially being canceled. So I guess leave it on your calendar until you get that official cancellation, but this is coming from Jane and the Climate Action Office.
Well, they
It's not-
canceled the one before this.
Okay, I should have maybe not. I don't want to misinform anyone. This is.
We'll
I
wait
was
to see if it's
asking-
taken off of our calendars. There was
Yes.
the calendar confusion. It's like calendar chaos.
We just got a reminder shortly, a little while ago, so I don't know, but.
I could check
just
in
be
about
aware.
it specifically tomorrow.
I just got a reminder that it was going on
Yeah,
through some AI thing, probably.
so we will stay loose in the saddle and see whether it happens or not, I guess. Rich,
Well, can we ask Liz to confirm with the Climate Office whether this is on or not on, and to send us a message?
Yeah, I'll check in right after this, and I'll follow up by email on whether or not the ones tomorrow specifically is happening.
Thank you. So look for an email from Liz, because as Gina pointed out, sometimes you get reminders that are generated automatically in cyber world that aren't real.
yep. And according to Jane, there was very low attendance, which is the reason. So Liz will be the final word on that. And Rich and I will keep at it with the planning and get agendas out to you all for the upcoming meetings. And, you know, be cognizant that we need concrete deliverables and goals identified at the beginning of each meeting. And again, I think that monthly session, input session with the DUs will most likely be our next, the meeting after the transportation session. So we'll make sure we reach out to the right folks and get them lined up for attendance. So I thought we might be releasing you all early today, but it turns out we're only about 6 minutes before schedule. So thank you all for
I'll
sticking in there.
take it. I'll take the
Thanks,
6 minutes.
everybody.
Enjoy your
Bye.
6 minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.